The February wind cut through my Carhartt jacket like a knife as I stood in my driveway at 5:30 in the morning, watching my breath form clouds in the darkness. My Ford F-350 diesel was warming up, the engine rumbling steadily as it idled in the bitter Massachusetts cold. It was negative 12 degrees, and I wasn't about to climb into a frozen cab to drive 45 minutes to the construction site in Worcester. My name is Bradley Vaughn, and I've been running my own HVAC contracting business for 15 years. I know better than to jump into a freezing truck with ice-cold hydraulic fluid. I'd been doing this same routine every winter morning for the past 3 years since my wife Rebecca and I moved into the Meadowbrook Estates community in Framingham. The subdivision was nice enough, with its brick-faced colonials and manicured lawns, though the HOA dues were steep at $300 a month. Still, Rebecca loved the neighborhood, and I'd grown accustomed to the rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. What I hadn't grown accustomed to was Brenda Zimmerman. Brenda was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with severely highlighted blonde hair that she wore in a bob that somehow always looked both perfectly styled and aggressively defensive. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a live, laugh, love bumper sticker and had opinions about everything. Every single thing. From the height of your grass to the type of mailbox flag you used to whether your garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 2 hours on collection day. I just poured my second cup of coffee into my thermos when I saw headlights pulling up beside my truck. The white Lexus. My stomach sank. Brenda rolled down her window, her face already pinched with displeasure. "Bradley, do you know what time it is?" "About 5:35, I said, taking a sip of coffee. "And do you know how long your truck has been idling?" "About 15 minutes, same as every morning." Her eyes narrowed behind her designer glasses. "Well, I'm here to inform you that it's a violation of the HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, subsection B. No vehicle may idle for more than 5 minutes within community boundaries." I stared at her. "Brenda, it's negative 12 degrees. My truck needs to warm up." "The bylaws don't make exceptions for weather, Bradley. Additionally, the noise is disturbing the peace. Mrs. Henderson called me at 5:15 this morning to complain. Mrs. Henderson lives 4 houses down and she's 83 years old. She's up at 4:30 every morning doing Tai Chi in her living room. She told me so herself." Brenda's jaw tightened. "Regardless, you're in violation. This is your official warning. If I catch you idling again, you'll receive a fine of $100 per occurrence. And if you continue after that, the fines will increase, and we can begin proceedings to place a lien on your property." The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted bitter. A lien? Over warming up my truck to go to work? The rules exist for everyone's benefit, Bradley. Perhaps you should leave earlier and warm your truck while driving. That's terrible for the engine, and dangerous. The defrost won't work properly, the windows will fog up. Then perhaps you should invest in a vehicle better suited to cold weather." She smiled, a tight, triumphant little expression that made me want to throw my coffee at her pristine white paint job. "Have a good day, Bradley." She rolled up her window and drove away, leaving me standing in my own driveway, furious and bewildered. I climbed into my now warm truck and headed to work, my mind churning the entire drive. The thing was, I knew Brenda was pushing boundaries that probably weren't even legal. Most municipalities had anti-idling laws, sure, but they were usually 10 or 15 minutes, and they typically exempted situations where idling was necessary for vehicle operation or worker safety. More importantly, HOA rules couldn't override basic property rights without being clearly established and reasonably enforced. But challenging her meant time, money, and lawyers. It meant becoming that guy in the neighborhood, the one fighting the HOA over something that might seem petty to others. I'd seen what happened to the Robinsons 2 streets over when they'd painted their shutters forest green instead of the approved hunter green. Brenda had made their lives miserable for 8 months. I tried to push it out of my mind as I worked that day, installing a new heating system in a renovated Victorian. But it nagged at me. By the time I got home that evening, Rebecca was already cooking dinner. "You look angry," she said, glancing up from the pasta she was stirring. I told her about the morning's encounter. Rebecca's expression shifted from surprise to anger to resignation. "She can't actually do that, can she?" Rebecca asked. "Legally, probably not. But she can make it expensive and annoying to fight her, and you know how she is. She'll find other things to cite us for. Suddenly our mailbox will be the wrong shade of black, or our holiday decorations will stay up one day too long." Rebecca sighed. "So, what do you want to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not paying a $100 fine for warming up my truck to go to work." The next morning, I set my alarm for 4:45. I went outside at 5, started my truck, and let it idle for exactly 4 minutes and 50 seconds before shutting it off. Then I sat in the freezing cab, waiting for the engine heat to slowly, painfully bring the interior temperature above Arctic. My breath fogged the windshield. My fingers ached even through my insulated gloves. By the time I actually left at 5:35, the cab was barely warm enough to be tolerable, and I spent the first 10 minutes of my drive scraping ice off the inside of my windshield with a credit card. I did the same thing the next day, and the next. By the end of the week, I'd had enough. My productivity was down because I was getting to sites late and distracted. I was exhausted from the cold, and I was furious at Brenda Zimmerman for making my life miserable over something so absurd. That Friday, I was working at a commercial property in Natick, installing a new boiler system for a strip mall. The property manager, a guy named Tom Chen, was walking me through the mechanical room when I noticed the oil tank. "You guys still run on heating oil?" I asked. "Yeah, most of the buildings out here do. Natural gas lines don't reach this far on this side of town." "Why?" "Just curious. Who's your supplier?" "Some company called Patriot Fuel. They're based out of Marlboro. Pretty decent service, though they've been slow on deliveries lately." Something clicked in my brain. Patriot Fuel. Yeah, you know them. I did know them. I knew them very well because I'd done the HVAC work on their warehouse expansion 2 years ago. More importantly, I'd stayed friends with the owner, Mike Sullivan. We grabbed beers occasionally, talked shop, complained about regulations and difficult customers, and Mike had mentioned more than once that his biggest client was a residential development in Framingham. Meadowbrook Estates. I called Mike that afternoon during my lunch break. "Bradley. Long time. How's business?" "Busy." "Hey, Mike, quick question. You still handle Meadowbrook Estates?" "Sure do. Have for about 6 years now. It's a great contract. HOA pays on time, automatic deliveries to about 40% of the homes in the development. Easy money. Why? I live there." "No kidding. Small world. You on oil heat?" "No, we've got natural gas, but I'm curious about something. Who's your contact for the HOA contract?" "Woman named Brenda Zimmerman. She's the president. Kind of intense, but like I said, pays on time." I felt that click again, stronger now. An idea was forming, dangerous and satisfying in equal measure. "Mike, hypothetically, if someone wanted to bid on that contract, how would that work?" There was a pause. "The contract's up for renewal in March, actually. Brenda mentioned they might be looking at other suppliers." Insurance requirements, competitive bidding, that whole thing. Why, you thinking of getting into fuel oil delivery? No, but I might know someone who'd be interested in bidding. What kind of volume are we talking about? About 45 residential customers. Deliveries typically every 6 to 8 weeks depending on the winter. Last year we delivered about 90,000 gallons total to that development. Good margin on that. Why are you really asking, Bradley? I told him about the idling situation. Mike was quiet for a long moment. She threatened to lien your house over warming up your truck. Yep. That's insane and probably not legal. Also, yes. But fighting it means lawyers and time and turning into the neighborhood pariah. Mike laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. So you want to mess with her contract? I'm just gathering information at this point. Well, information-wise, I can tell you that the contract requires a 30-day notice for termination by either party. The HOA can switch suppliers anytime they want with proper notice. And suppliers can drop clients too with the same notice. We've never had issues, so it's never come up. What if you decided to drop them as a client? Another pause. Bradley, are you asking me to drop a $60,000 a year contract to spite your HOA president? No, I said carefully. I'm asking what would happen if you did. Well, chaos probably. It's February. Everyone's heating oil tanks are getting low. They'd need to find a new supplier, set up new accounts, schedule deliveries. Most suppliers are slammed this time of year. Could take weeks to get everyone set up. Some folks might run out of heat while they're waiting. That sounds dangerous. It would be, which is why I wouldn't do it without a good reason. I thought about Brenda's face, her smug little smile as she'd threatened my property over warming up my truck. I thought about the Robinsons' 8 months of harassment. I thought about Mrs. Henderson 4 houses down who probably hadn't complained about anything in her life, and Brenda just using her name as an excuse. What if I told you I could get you a better contract? More volume, better terms. I'd say you've got my attention. Here's the thing about HOA politics. Most people don't pay attention to them. They elect a board, pay their dues, and assume everything's being handled competently. They don't read the meeting minutes. They don't review the contracts. They definitely don't show up to the annual meetings unless there's free food. But I'd been paying attention, especially after Brenda's harassment started. I'd read every single document on the HOA website, and I'd noticed something interesting. The heating oil contract wasn't actually managed by the full HOA board. It was managed by a vendor relations committee, which consisted of exactly one person, Brenda Zimmerman. She had unilateral authority to negotiate and sign contracts for routine services below $75,000 annually. It was a provision she'd pushed through 3 years ago, claiming it would streamline operations. What that meant in practice was that Brenda could drop Patriot Fuel if she wanted to. But more importantly, if Patriot Fuel dropped Meadowbrook Estates, it would be Brenda's problem to solve. Alone, I spent the weekend doing research. I called in favors from 3 different fuel oil suppliers I knew through work. I got quotes, terms, pricing structures, and I put together a proposal that would save the HOA about $8,000 annually while providing better service guarantees and faster emergency delivery times. Then I called Mike back on Monday morning. You still interested in that better contract I mentioned? I'm listening. I've got 3 commercial properties that need heating oil, 2 in Framingham, 1 in Natick, total volume about 70,000 gallons annually. Better margins than residential, easier deliveries. Businesses pay net 15 instead of net 30. I can get you meetings with the property managers this week. In exchange for, you drop Meadowbrook Estates. 30-day notice, completely professional, citing capacity constraints and strategic business focus. Mike was quiet for a long moment. You're serious about this? Completely. Bradley, I like you, but that's still a risk. What if these commercial contracts fall through? They won't. I've already talked to the property managers. They're not happy with their current suppliers. Your prices are better. Your service reputation is solid. I'm basically handing you 3 new clients. The only risk is Brenda being angry. And you're okay with her knowing you're behind this. She won't know. Not unless you tell her. From her perspective, you're just a supplier making a business decision. You'll send a professional letter, give the full 30 days, even offer to help facilitate the transition. You're not burning bridges. You're just refocusing your business. Happens all the time. Another long pause. When would you need this to happen? This week. Mike laughed, but I could hear him considering it. You know this is kind of crazy, right? Yep, and petty. Also yes. But also kind of brilliant. And that woman did threaten to lien your house over warming up your truck in -degree weather. She did. Okay, let me think about it. I'll call you tomorrow. He called me back that afternoon, set up the meetings. If these commercial contracts are as solid as you say, I'll send the letter to Meadowbrook on Thursday. I felt a surge of satisfaction that was probably unhealthy. You won't regret this, Mike. I better not. And Bradley, you didn't hear this from me, but Brenda's been a pain to work with anyway. She calls at weird hours, questions every delivery ticket, and tried to negotiate the contract price down by 20% last year. The only reason I kept the contract was because the volume made it worthwhile. But if I've got comparable volume elsewhere, yeah, I'm okay with this. I set up the meetings. I gave Mike every bit of information and leverage I could. By Wednesday, he had commitments from all 3 properties. On Thursday morning, he sent a professional, courteous letter to the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Attention Brenda Zimmerman, informing her that Patriot Fuel would be discontinuing service to the development effective March 21st, citing strategic business restructuring and capacity constraints. He offered to provide recommendations for alternative suppliers and assistance with the transition. I heard about Brenda's reaction from my neighbor, Janet, who worked from home and saw everything that happened on our street. Brenda came tearing down the street at like 10 in the morning, Janet told me over the fence that evening. She was on her phone, screaming at someone. I've never seen her that upset. You know what happened? No idea, I said, keeping my face carefully neutral. Apparently their heating oil company is dropping them. In the middle of winter. Can you believe that? Brenda's scrambling to find a replacement. She sent out an emergency email to the whole neighborhood about it. I checked my email when I went inside. Sure enough, there was a message from Brenda, sent to all Meadowbrook Estates residents at 11:37 that morning. Dear residents, due to unforeseen circumstances, Patriot Fuel has decided to discontinue service to our community. I am working diligently to secure a replacement vendor. In the meantime, please monitor your heating oil levels carefully and contact me immediately if you are at risk of running out. I apologize for this inconvenience, and am doing everything possible to resolve the situation quickly. Brenda Zimmerman, HOA President. I poured myself a bourbon and smiled. The next morning, I started my truck at 5 and let it idle for a full 20 minutes while I drank my coffee and scrolled through the news on my phone. The temperature had dropped to -8 overnight. My truck purred happily in the cold air, heat pouring from the vents by the time I climbed inside. Brenda didn't show up. She didn't show up the next morning either, or the one after that. I later learned she'd been on the phone for hours each day, desperately calling heating oil suppliers trying to set up a new contract. and she was discovering what Mike had warned about. February is peak season for heating oil. Most suppliers are at capacity, with tight delivery schedules and long waiting lists for new customers. Setting up accounts for 45 residential customers, all at once, in the middle of the busiest time of year. Most companies weren't interested. The ones that were interested wanted premium pricing and couldn't guarantee delivery windows. I heard through Janet that Brenda had called an emergency HOA board meeting for Saturday morning. I made sure to attend. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a bland room with beige walls and folding chairs. About 30 residents showed up, which was 10 times the normal attendance. People were worried. Brenda stood at the front, looking more frazzled than I'd ever seen her. Her hair wasn't as perfectly styled. She had dark circles under her eyes. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, we're facing a challenge with our heating oil service. I've been in contact with multiple suppliers, and I'm happy to report that I've received preliminary quotes from 3 companies." "How preliminary?" asked Jim Martinez, one of the board members who usually rubber-stamped whatever Brenda wanted. "Well, I'm still negotiating final terms and delivery schedules." "Brenda, my tank is at 20%, said an older man I recognized as Mr. Peterson from Maple Street. "How long until we have a new supplier actually delivering?" "I'm working as quickly as possible." "That's not an answer," Mr. Peterson said, his voice rising. "It's February. If I run out of heat, my pipes could freeze. I could have thousands of dollars in damage. When will we have a new supplier?" Brenda's jaw tightened in that way I recognized. "Mr. Peterson, I understand your concern, but these things take time. I'm doing everything I can." "Why did Patriot Fuel drop us in the first place?" asked a woman I didn't recognize. "They cited business restructuring. These things happen. In the middle of winter, that seems unusual." "Nevertheless, that's what happened. Now I have quotes from how much?" Jim Martinez interrupted. "What are the quotes?" Brenda hesitated. "The most competitive quote is from Northeast Heating Oil. They can take on our accounts at approximately 11% above our previous rate." The room erupted. 11% was significant. For most homes, that translated to several $100s per year in increased costs. "Why so much more?" someone shouted. "It's peak season and we're a large volume ad. This is the best available rate." I raised my hand. Brenda's eyes found mine, and I saw something flicker across her face. Suspicion. Recognition. "Yes, Bradley. Have you considered putting out a request for proposals? Let multiple companies bid competitively." "I've already contacted multiple companies." "No, I mean a formal RFP process." "Post it publicly, give suppliers 2 weeks to submit proposals, review them with the full board. That's standard practice for contracts this size." Jim Martinez nodded slowly. "That's actually a good idea. Why didn't we do that?" "Because we don't have 2 weeks," Brenda snapped. "People need heat now. People also need reasonable prices," I said calmly. "And transparency. This is a $60,000 annual contract. Shouldn't the full board be involved in reviewing options?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Brenda's face was flushing red. "The Vendor Relations Committee has authority over contracts under $75,000. That's you, Brenda, right? Committee of 1. This came from Alice Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's daughter, who'd apparently shown up to keep tabs on things for her mother. "That's correct," Brenda said tightly. "Maybe that should change," Alice said. "This seems like too much power for one person to have, especially given the current situation." More murmurs of agreement. I could see Brenda losing control of the room. "I move that we establish a proper vendor relations committee of at least 3 board members," Jim Martinez said suddenly. and that all contracts over $25,000 require full board approval. I second that, said Mr. Peterson immediately. Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. That's not on the agenda. So we'll add it, Jim said. All in favor, hands went up around the room. Brenda tried to maintain order, tried to argue about proper procedures and bylaws, but the room had turned against her. Within 15 minutes, the motion had passed. A new 3-person committee had been formed with Jim Martinez as chair, and Brenda had been effectively stripped of her unilateral contracting authority. Now, Jim said, taking over the meeting with surprising assertiveness, let's talk about this RFP process Bradley mentioned. I walked them through it. Post a detailed request for proposals on the HOA website and with local suppliers. Include current volume data, delivery requirements, payment terms. Give suppliers 2 weeks to submit proposals. Review them as a committee and present the top 3 options to the full board for a vote. But what about in the meantime? Mr. Peterson asked. I'm still at 20%. Most suppliers offer will call service, I said. You can call any heating oil company and schedule a delivery as needed, even without a contract. It's more expensive per gallon, but it works for emergency situations. If folks are running low, they can schedule individual deliveries while the HOA works out the long-term contract. Why didn't you suggest that? Mr. Peterson asked Brenda. She didn't answer. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with the new committee promising to have an RFP posted by Monday. I walked out feeling satisfied but careful not to show it. Brenda caught up with me in the parking lot. You did this, she said. Her voice was low and shaking with anger. Did what? You know what? The fuel company, the meeting, all of it. Brenda, I just suggested a better process for vendor selection. You're the one who apparently negotiated a contract that could be terminated with 30 days' notice. That's on you. I will find out if you had anything to do with Patriot Fuel dropping us. How would I have anything to do with that? I'm an HVAC contractor, not a fuel oil supplier. I kept my voice level, friendly even. But you know what's interesting? This whole situation could have been avoided if you hadn't been so focused on harassing me over warming up my truck. Maybe if you'd spent less time monitoring your neighbors' driveways at 5 in the morning, you'd have had time to negotiate better contract terms. Just a thought. I got in my truck and drove away, leaving her standing in the cold parking lot. The next week was beautiful. I idled my truck every morning for a full 20 minutes. Brenda never showed up to complain. She was too busy dealing with the fallout from the heating oil situation. The RFP went up on Monday. By Friday, they'd received 8 proposals from regional suppliers. Jim Martinez called me Tuesday evening. Hey Bradley, you got a minute? I wanted to pick your brain about these heating oil proposals. Sure, what's up? Well, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I work in insurance. But you do HVAC work, so you probably know the heating oil industry pretty well, right? I smiled. I might know a thing or two. Could you take a look at these proposals? Maybe give me your professional opinion on which ones look solid. Happy to help. He sent me the proposals that evening. I reviewed them carefully. 6 were legitimate companies with decent terms. One was clearly a lowball bid from a fly-by-night operation, and one was from a company called Regional Fuel Services, based out of Worcester. I knew Regional. I'd done work on their warehouse too, and their owner, Dave Kowalski, was a straight shooter. More importantly, Dave had mentioned last year that he was trying to expand into the Framingham residential market. This would be a perfect entry point for him. I called Dave the next morning. Bradley. Long time. What can I do for you? I just reviewed an RFP proposal from you for Meadowbrook Estates. Oh yeah, that's where you live, right? Small world. It is. Your proposal looks solid. Competitive pricing, good service terms. But I think you could sweeten it a bit and basically guarantee the contract. I'm listening. Offer a 1-year price lock at your current rates. Most of the other bidders have escalation clauses. Also, offer free emergency delivery service, guaranteed within 24 hours. That'll set you apart from everyone else. That's risky. Prices go up, I'm stuck. Dave, this gets you into the Framingham residential market with 45 customers. That's a foothold. And with your efficient routing, you can make the emergency delivery guarantee work. You told me yourself you've got excess capacity. He thought about it. You know, you're right. And honestly, I've been trying to break into this area for 2 years. This is exactly the kind of opportunity I need. I'll revise the proposal today. One more thing. The Vendor Relations Committee chair is Jim Martinez. He's a good guy, but he doesn't know the industry. When you present, focus on reliability and service, not just price. Talk about your safety record, your delivery tracking system, your backup supply arrangements. Make him feel confident that his neighbors won't run out of heat. You're basically writing my sales pitch for me. I want a good supplier for my neighborhood. Dave, I trust you. Just close the deal. He did. The revised proposal came in Thursday. The committee met Saturday to review everything. Jim Martinez called me again Sunday morning. We're going with Regional Fuel Services. Their proposal was the best across the board. Great pricing, excellent terms, and when I talked to Dave on the phone, he really seemed to understand the importance of reliable service. That's great news, Jim. Brenda fought it, though. She wanted to go with Northeast Heating Oil, the company she'd originally contacted, said they were more established. What changed her mind? We outvoted her. The committee is 3 people now, remember. She's not in charge anymore. I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Sounds like the new system is working. It really is. You know, this whole fuel oil crisis was a nightmare, but in hindsight, it exposed some real problems with how we were handling vendor relations. We're implementing new policies across the board. Full board review for all major contracts, competitive bidding requirements, term limits for committee positions. We probably should have done this years ago. Better late than never. Oh, and Bradley. I talked to our lawyer about that idling rule Brenda cited. He said it's probably unenforceable. It's more restrictive than the town ordinance. It wasn't properly noticed when it was added to the bylaws, and it arguably violates reasonable use of property. He suggested we remove it. Is that right? Yeah, I'm bringing it to the next board meeting. Between you and me, I think Brenda just made it up to hassle you. I found the bylaw she referenced, and the language is ambiguous at best. She was interpreting it in the most restrictive way possible. That sounds like Brenda. Jim laughed. Yeah, well, her reign of terror is ending. People are paying attention now. Mrs. Henderson's daughter is running for the board in the spring election. So is Dave Patel from Birch Street. I think we're going to see some real changes. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated satisfaction. I'd gone up against Brenda Zimmerman and won. Not by fighting her directly, not by hiring lawyers or making a scene, but by understanding the system and using it against her. The new heating oil service started March 21st. Dave's company did exactly what they'd promised, setting up all 45 accounts seamlessly and conducting deliveries with military precision. Several residents specifically commented to the board about how much better the service was compared to Patriot Fuel. Brenda got quieter after that. She still showed up to board meetings, still submitted reports and voted on issues. But the edge was gone. The power was gone. She was just one voice among several now, and increasingly, the other board members were pushing back against her more aggressive positions. In April, Mrs. Henderson's daughter Alice won a seat on the board in a special election. In May, the board voted to remove the vehicle idling restriction from the bylaws entirely, citing legal concerns and lack of enforcement practicality. In June, Dave Patel was elected treasurer, replacing one of Brenda's longtime allies. And through all of it, I kept warming up my truck every morning, 20 minutes in the winter cold, the diesel engine rumbling peacefully in my driveway. But the story didn't end there, because Brenda Zimmerman wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. In late July, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice that my property had been inspected and found in violation of multiple community standards. According to the letter, my fence was 3 inches too tall, my mailbox was mounted incorrectly, and my lawn exceeded the permitted grass height by ½ an inch. The fines totaled $700. I read the letter twice, my anger building. Then I walked outside and looked at my fence. It was the same fence I'd installed 4 years ago, right after we'd moved in. I'd gotten HOA approval for the design and height. I had the paperwork. The mailbox was mounted on the same post in the same location it had been for 4 years. Nothing had changed, and my lawn. I'd mowed it 3 days ago. It was perfectly maintained. This was retaliation, pure and simple. Brenda was striking back the only way she had left. I called Jim Martinez. "Jim, I just got a notice from the HOA about violations on my property." "What?" "I didn't approve any violation notices." "Who signed it?" "Brenda Zimmerman, HOA president." Jim swore softly. "She's still salty about the fuel oil thing and about losing control of the board. Let me look into this. Can you send me a copy of the letter?" I photographed it and sent it to his email. He called back 20 minutes later. "Bradley, this is complete nonsense. I pulled your file. Your fence was approved in writing 4 years ago. There's no record of any inspection of your property, and the lawn height violation is ridiculous. Our bylaws say lawns must be maintained, but there's no specific height requirement." She's making things up. "So what do? You appeal it. There's a process. Submit a written appeal to the board within 14 days. We'll schedule a hearing. Bring your documentation about the fence approval. Take photos of your property. This won't stand." "Jim, I appreciate your help, but this is harassment. I'm not interested in going through some appeal process for fictional violations. I want this to stop." "I understand. Let me talk to the other board members. We might need to have a conversation about Brenda's continued role as president." That conversation apparently happened that week, though I wasn't privy to the details. What I did hear, from multiple sources, was that it was contentious. Brenda accused the board of being in my pocket. She claimed there was a conspiracy to undermine her authority. She threatened to sue the HOA if they removed her as president without cause. The problem was that HOA bylaws are funny things. Presidents serve annual terms, and Brenda's term didn't end until December. The board couldn't just remove her without demonstrating clear misconduct or incapacity. And technically, issuing violation notices, even spurious ones, was within her authority as president. What they could do, however, was vote to require all violation notices to be approved by a majority of the board before being issued. That motion passed 4-1, with Brenda being the only dissenting vote. My violation notice was formally rescinded at the August board meeting. Brenda sat stone-faced through the vote, saying nothing. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In September, my wife Rebecca was backing out of our driveway when another car clipped her back bumper. Minor damage, but the police were called to document the accident. The other driver was apologetic, admitted fault, and insurance covered everything. Except 2 days later, I got another certified letter. This one alleged that I was operating a commercial vehicle from a residential property in violation of the HOA bylaws. As evidence, it cited the police report from Rebecca's accident, which mentioned that I owned a 2019 Ford F-350 truck with my business name and phone number on the door. The letter demanded that I remove all commercial signage from any vehicle parked at my residence and threatened daily fines of $50 if I didn't comply within 7 days. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about rules anymore. This wasn't about community standards or property values. This was personal vindictiveness, and it was escalating. I called Jim Martinez again, but this time I also called my lawyer. My attorney, Sarah Brennan, had handled the closing when we'd bought the house. She was sharp, experienced, and didn't suffer fools. I met with her the next morning and laid out everything. The idling complaint, the fuel oil contract situation, the fake violation notices, and now this attack on my business vehicle. Sarah listened, taking notes, her expression growing progressively more severe. "This is textbook harassment," she said when I finished. "And legally, she's on very shaky ground with this commercial vehicle complaint. HOA covenants can restrict commercial activity conducted from residential properties, but they can't typically restrict what kind of vehicle you park in your own driveway, especially if it's not being used for commercial purposes at the residence. So what do I do?" We send her a cease and desist letter. We document everything. We make it clear that if this continues, you'll pursue legal action for harassment and abuse of authority. We also send a copy to the HOA's insurance company. Trust me, once their insurer sees this pattern, they'll pressure the board to rein her in. Won't that just make her angrier? Probably. But it'll also make her more cautious. Right now, she thinks she can get away with this. We need to show her there are consequences. Sarah drafted the letter that afternoon. It was 3 pages of dense legalese that boiled down to, "Stop harassing my client or get sued into oblivion." She sent it certified mail to Brenda personally, with copies to all HOA board members and the HOA's insurance carrier. The response was swift and not what I expected. 2 days after the letter was sent, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Bradley Vaughn?" "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Tom Zimmerman. I'm Brenda's husband. I need to talk to you about what's been happening." I sat down slowly. "Okay. Look, I know Brenda's been giving you a hard time. I know about the truck idling thing, the fuel oil situation, the violation notices, all of it. She told you some of it. The rest I figured out. And I'm calling to apologize and to ask you to back off the legal threats. Mr. Zimmerman, with respect, your wife has been harassing me for months. She's making up violations, attacking my business, and abusing her position on the HOA board. I'm not backing off. I understand. And you're right, but there's something you don't know. Brenda's been under an enormous amount of stress. Her mother died in January. She's been having health issues. She's been seeing a therapist for anxiety and control issues." I felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but a recognition that maybe there was more going on than I'd understood. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said carefully, "but that doesn't excuse what she's been doing." "I know it doesn't. That's why I'm calling. I've talked to Brenda about all of this. I've told her she needs to step back from the HOA presidency. She's agreed to resign." I was quiet for a moment. "When?" "She's drafting her resignation letter tonight. She'll submit it to the board tomorrow. I'm asking you, as one neighbor to another, to accept that and not pursue legal action. She's not a bad person, Bradley. She's just been in a bad place and she took it out on you. It was wrong, but she's trying to make it right." I thought about it. Thought about Brenda's face that morning in February, her tight smile as she threatened to leave my house. Thought about the months of stress and anger and fighting. Thought about the satisfaction I'd felt watching her lose control of the board. And I thought about the fact that revenge, satisfying as it was, had a cost. Lawyer fees, time, energy, more conflict. If she resigns and leaves me alone, I won't pursue legal action, I said finally. But if she comes after me again in any way, the offer's off the table. Fair enough. Thank you, Bradley. Brenda's resignation was announced at the September board meeting. The official reason given was personal and family health matters. Jim Martinez was elected interim president. Alice Henderson took over as president pro tem, and just like that, it was over. Except, of course, it wasn't quite over. Because in early October, I was having coffee with Mike Sullivan, and he mentioned something interesting. You hear about that fire at Patriot Fuels warehouse? I set down my cup. No, what fire? Last week. Electrical fire in their main warehouse. Did about $200,000 in damage. Nobody was hurt, thank God, but it's going to impact their operations for months. That's terrible. Yeah. You know what's weird, though? The fire inspector found evidence that someone might have tampered with the electrical panel. They're investigating it as possible arson. A chill ran down my spine. Arson? That's what I heard. They're reviewing security footage, interviewing employees, the whole deal. Crazy, right? I thought about Brenda, her anger, her need for control. I thought about her threatening to find out if I'd had anything to do with Patriot Fuel dropping Meadowbrook Estates, and I wondered, Mike, when exactly did this fire happen? Thursday night, October 3rd. Why? Just curious. But I wasn't just curious, I was concerned. Because October 3rd was 2 days after Brenda had resigned from the HOA board. 2 days after she'd been forced to give up the power and control she'd wielded so tightly. I didn't want to believe she was capable of something like arson, but I also couldn't shake the timing. I called Sarah Brennan again. This might be nothing, I said, but I need to tell someone. I explained the situation. The fire, the timing, the investigation, my suspicions. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Bradley, if you genuinely suspect Brenda Zimmerman of arson, you need to contact the police. That's not an HOA matter or a civil matter. That's a serious crime. I don't have any proof, just a feeling based on timing and circumstance. Then tell them that. Give them the context. Let them investigate. If you're wrong, no harm done. If you're right, you might prevent future violence. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I called the Marlborough Police Department and asked to speak to whoever was investigating the Patriot Fuel fire. I was connected to Detective Lisa Park, an arson investigator with the State Fire Marshal's office. I explained who I was and why I was calling. I told her about the fuel oil contract situation, about Brenda's harassment, about her forced resignation, and about the timing of the fire. Detective Park listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked a few clarifying questions about dates and details. Mr. Vaughn, can you think of any reason Mrs. Zimmerman would have to target Patriot Fuel specifically? Any interaction between them? Not that I know of directly. But Mike Sullivan, the owner, was the one who terminated their contract with Meadowbrook Estates. If she somehow found out that I was involved in arranging that, she might blame him. And how would she have found out? I don't know. Maybe she didn't. Maybe this is just paranoia on my part. But the timing bothered me enough to call. I appreciate that. Let me look into it. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. I hung up feeling both relieved that I'd reported it and guilty for potentially throwing Brenda under the bus based on nothing more than suspicion. I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late October, I saw police cars parked outside Brenda's house. 3 cruisers, lights off but unmistakably official. Janet called me immediately. "Bradley, are you seeing this? They're at Brenda's house. I see it." "What do you think is happening?" "No idea." But I had an idea. I had a very good idea. The next morning it was in the local news. Brenda Zimmerman had been arrested and charged with second-degree arson and attempted insurance fraud. According to the article, security footage from a business near Patriot Fuel had captured a white Lexus SUV in the area at the time of the fire. The vehicle was registered to Brenda. Cell phone records placed her phone near the warehouse that night. And investigators had found evidence of accelerants consistent with materials found in Brenda's garage. The article noted that the investigation was ongoing, and Brenda had been released on bail pending trial. I called Detective Park. "Mr. Vaughn, thanks for calling back." "Yes, we made an arrest. Your tip was helpful in establishing motive and timeline." "So she really did it." "The evidence is strong. She's claiming she was just driving by the area, but we have her on camera entering the property. We have accelerant evidence. And we have testimony from her husband that she'd been obsessed with the fuel oil company situation. He said she'd been talking about how they'd ruined everything and needed to pay." I felt sick. I didn't think she'd actually do something like this. People do crazy things when they feel wronged and lose control. You did the right thing by calling us. The case moved forward through the fall and winter. Brenda pleaded not guilty initially, but in January, her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to attempted arson and property destruction in exchange for dropping the insurance fraud charge. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with 2 years suspended, plus 5 years of probation and mandatory mental health treatment. The Zimmermans sold their house in February and moved out of the neighborhood. I heard through the grapevine that Tom was filing for divorce. The whole thing left a strange taste in my mouth. I wanted to get back at Brenda for her petty tyranny over the truck idling situation. I'd wanted to see her lose her grip on the HOA and her ability to harass her neighbors. And I'd gotten that. But I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted her to spiral into criminal behavior. I hadn't wanted her to destroy her life. Rebecca and I talked about it one evening, sitting on our back deck in the unusually warm March air. "You think it's your fault?" she asked gently. "I don't know. I didn't make her commit arson, but I did set things in motion that took away her sense of control. Maybe if I'd just dealt with the truck thing differently, none of this would have happened. Or maybe she was always unstable, and it would have come out some other way eventually. You can't take responsibility for her choices, Bradley. I know. But I also can't pretend I didn't enjoy taking her down a few notches. The fuel oil contract thing was calculated. It was revenge. It was also justice, in a way. She was abusing her power. You found a way to check that power without breaking any rules yourself. That's not wrong. Even if it pushed her over the edge. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I think some people have edges that are too close to the line. You can't live your life trying to protect unstable people from themselves. You just have to do what's right and hope everyone else does the same. I wanted to believe that. Mostly, I did believe it. But the whole situation had taught me something about the nature of conflict and consequences. Actions have ripples. Sometimes those ripples go in directions you never intended or imagined. The HOA, meanwhile, was functioning better than ever. Jim Martinez proved to be an excellent president, focused on practical management rather than petty control. The new Vendor Relations Committee was transparent and efficient. Regional Fuel Services was providing excellent service at competitive prices. And I warmed up my truck every morning without guilt or harassment, watching the sun rise over the rooftops of Meadowbrook Estates, thinking about power and justice, and the complicated ways they intersect. In April, a new family moved into Brenda's old house. They had 2 young kids and a friendly golden retriever. The husband, Mark, introduced himself to me one Saturday morning while I was working in my garage. "Nice truck," he said, gesturing at my F-350. "You in construction?" "HVAC. I run my own contracting business." "That's great. We might need to talk to you actually. The heat pump in this place is ancient. Happy to take a look anytime. I heard there was some drama with the previous owner. HOA stuff." I considered how much to share. "There were some issues, but the HOA's under new management now. It's a good community." "That's good to hear." My wife was worried when she heard stories about the old president, but everyone we've met has been really welcoming. After Mark left, I stood in my driveway, looking at my truck, thinking about that first morning in February when Brenda had pulled up beside it and threatened me with fines and liens. Thinking about how a simple conflict over warming up a vehicle in cold weather had spiraled into contract manipulations, board politics, harassment, and eventually arson. It felt like ancient history now, even though it had only been a little over a year. The neighborhood had moved on. The HOA had reformed. New families were moving in. Life continued, but I'd learned some things I wouldn't forget. I'd learned that seemingly small abuses of power matter because they create cultures where bigger abuses become possible. I'd learned that standing up for yourself requires strategy, not just anger. I'd learned that victory often comes with unexpected complications, and I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply creating a better system where petty tyrants can't flourish in the first place. That summer, the HOA voted to implement term limits for all board positions. 2 years maximum as president, 4 years maximum on the board total, with at least a 2-year break before you could serve again. It was a direct response to the Brenda situation, a recognition that concentrated, long-term power in a small community organization creates problems. Jim Martinez supported the change, even though it meant he'd have to step down as president after his term ended in December. "It's the right thing to do," he told me at the summer block party. "Nobody should have that much control for that long. It's not healthy for them or the community." I raised my beer in agreement, to healthy communities and reasonable rules, and to warm trucks on cold mornings. We clinked bottles and laughed. By fall, the Zimmerman situation felt like a cautionary tale that people referenced but didn't dwell on. New dramas had emerged. The Patels had installed solar panels that some neighbors thought were ugly. Someone's teenager was parking their car blocking the sidewalk. Mrs. Henderson had started a petition to add speed bumps on Maple Street. Normal HOA stuff. Manageable conflicts without the edge of personal vendetta or abuse of power. I stayed involved in HOA affairs, attending meetings regularly, serving on committees when needed. Not because I loved HOA politics, but because I'd learned that someone has to pay attention. Someone has to care about bylaws and contracts and fair processes. Otherwise, the Brendas of the world fill that vacuum, and everyone suffers for it. My business continued to thrive. I hired 2 additional technicians that year and expanded into commercial refrigeration work. The truck that had started all the trouble served me well, idling peacefully in my driveway every winter morning, exactly as it was meant to. And every time I started it up in the cold darkness, letting the engine warm while I finished my coffee, I thought about that morning in February. About Brenda's white Lexus pulling up beside me. About her threat to lien my property over warming up my truck. I thought about how close I'd come to just backing down, to accepting her arbitrary rule, to making my life harder and less safe just to avoid conflict. and I was glad I'd fought back. Not perfectly, not without consequences, but effectively. I'd fought back using the system's own rules, leveraging relationships and contracts and basic economics. I'd fought back without breaking laws or making threats or descending to her level of personal vindictiveness. Well, mostly. The fuel oil contract thing had definitely been vindictive, but it had also been elegant and legal and ultimately good for the community. Sometimes vindictiveness and justice overlap in interesting ways. By the end of that second year, Rebecca and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm in Meadowbrook Estates. We knew our neighbors. We participated in community events. We appreciated the well-maintained common areas and the responsive HOA board. And when winter came again, and the temperature dropped below zero, I stood in my driveway with my coffee, watching my truck idle in the dark, warm air pouring from its vents. No white Lexus appeared to harass me. No violation notices arrived in the mail. No petty tyrant threatened my livelihood or my property, just a man, his truck, and a February morning in Massachusetts. Cold, clear, and peaceful. That's all I'd ever wanted. The freedom to do my job safely and efficiently without unnecessary interference from people with too much power and too little judgment. It shouldn't have been complicated, but it was, because that's how human systems work. They get complicated by people who forget that rules exist to serve communities, not to feed personal egos. Brenda Zimmerman forgot that. She paid the price for that forgetting in ways that went far beyond losing an HOA presidency. Her life fell apart because she couldn't let go of control, couldn't accept that her authority had limits, couldn't process conflict without escalating it to destruction. I felt sorry for her in the end. Not sorry enough to regret my actions, but sorry that a person could be so trapped by their need for control that they'd commit arson when that control was taken away. The human mind is a strange thing. So, is the human need for power and significance. In an HOA, those needs can be magnified because the stakes feel both enormous and petty at the same time. Your house, your biggest investment, your daily living space, all subject to rules enforced by volunteer neighbors who may or may not have your best interests at heart. It's a recipe for conflict. The only thing that makes it work is good faith, reasonable people, and systems that prevent any single person from having too much power. Meadowbrook Estates has those systems now. It didn't before, but it does now. And that's my legacy from the whole Brenda situation. Not the drama, not the revenge, not even the victory, but the systemic changes that came from it. The term limits, the committee oversight, the competitive bidding processes, the requirement for board approval on major decisions. Those changes will outlast everyone currently living in the neighborhood. They'll protect future residents from future Brendas. And that matters more than any individual conflict or resolution. I'm not a hero in this story. I'm just a guy who wanted to warm up his truck and got pushed into a conflict he didn't ask for. I responded pragmatically, sometimes pettily, occasionally vindictively. I won, more or less. But the real victory wasn't mine personally. It belonged to the community, which learned something important about governance and accountability. That's the thing about HOA conflicts. They're never really about what they seem to be about. The truck idling thing wasn't about noise or emissions or bylaws. It was about control, respect, and boundaries. The fuel oil contract wasn't about heating oil. It was about accountability and consequence. The whole spiral into Brenda's arrest wasn't about any single action. It was about what happens when someone's need for control meets their loss of power. Understanding that made it easier to live with how everything played out. I didn't ruin Brenda's life. She did that herself, through choices she made when confronted with changes she couldn't accept. I just initiated the changes. What she did with them was on her. Still, late at night sometimes, I wondered if there was a different path. A conversation I could have had with her that first morning, a way to de-escalate rather than engage. But I don't think so, honestly. Brenda wasn't interested in conversation or compromise. She was interested in compliance and control. Some conflicts can't be resolved through dialogue because one party isn't negotiating in good faith. So you do what you can with the tools you have. You find leverage. You use systems. You protect yourself and hopefully improve things for others in the process. That's not noble or heroic. It's just practical human behavior in the face of unreasonable opposition. And at the end of the day, I still have my truck, my business, my house, and my peace of mind. Brenda has probation, mandatory therapy, a divorce, and a criminal record. Those outcomes weren't equivalent responses to the original conflict, but they weren't my doing either. They were consequences of her own choices, amplified by whatever psychological issues drove those choices. I sleep fine at night. My conscience is clear. And every winter morning I start my truck and let it idle as long as it needs to be ready for the day ahead. That simple act, which should never have been controversial, feels like a small but significant freedom worth fighting for. And that's the story. Not a heroic tale, not a simple narrative of good versus evil, just a complicated human conflict about power and petness that spiraled in unexpected directions before finding resolution through systemic change and individual consequences. Life in Meadowbrook Estates goes on. The HOA functions. Neighbors argue about speed bumps and solar panels. Kids play in the streets on summer evenings. Dogs bark. Lawns get mowed. And every winter morning, diesel trucks idle in driveways while their owners drink coffee and prepare for work. Normal life, protected by boring systems and reasonable rules. That's all any of us really want from an HOA. Brenda wanted more. She wanted power and significance and control. She got those things for a while and then she lost them, and in losing them, she lost everything else too. There's probably a moral in there somewhere about the dangers of seeking power in small kingdoms. But I'm not a philosopher. I'm an HVAC contractor. I fix heating systems and occasionally deal with difficult HOA presidents. The former is much more straightforward than the latter, but both require understanding how systems work and what happens when those systems fail. Brenda was a system failure. The old HOA structure was a system failure. We fixed one by removing her from power. We fixed the other by changing the rules. Both fixes were necessary. Both made life better for everyone involved, except possibly Brenda herself. And that's how community governance is supposed to work. Not perfectly, not without conflict, but eventually toward better systems and better outcomes. It's messy and human, and sometimes petty, and occasionally results in someone getting arrested for arson. But at the end of it all, we have a better HOA, better rules, better oversight, and warmer trucks on cold mornings. I'll take that as a win, however complicated the path to get there was. Sometimes the journey is messy, but the destination makes it worthwhile. Sometimes standing up for something small, like the right to warm up your truck, leads to something bigger, like reforming community governance structures. And sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy wins against the petty tyrant without becoming a tyrant himself. That's my story. That's how I dealt with an HOA Karen who reported my truck idling in the cold. I pulled their heating oil delivery contract, watched her world crumble, helped reform the HOA, and now I live in a better community with better rules and the freedom to warm up my truck in peace. It wasn't clean, it wasn't simple, but it was effective. And in the end, that's what matters.